The red sun was setting on Colony World B-147 as Staff Sergeant James Miller walked through the empty streets. His boots made soft crunching sounds on the crystalline ground. The abandoned alien city looked like a ghost town, with tall, spiral buildings reaching into the purple sky. 2 weeks had passed since the bright-scale aliens had evacuated their colony, leaving behind only silence and shadows. James adjusted his radiation shield and checked his scanner again. Section 7 clear. He spoke into his radio. Moving to final sector for today's patrol. Copy that, Miller, came the reply from base camp. Make it quick. Storm's picking up. As he walked past the empty buildings, James noticed how the mineral-based architecture caught the dying sunlight, creating rainbow patterns on the ground. It was beautiful, but also sad. Thousands of people had lived here just weeks ago, before the warning came about the approaching stellar anomaly that would make the planet uninhabitable. A sudden movement caught his eye. James raised his rifle, switching his visor to thermal imaging mode. In this cold environment, any heat signature would stand out clearly. He moved carefully toward a small building that might have been a house or a shop. It was hard to tell with alien architecture. Base, hold on. I'm picking up something, he reported, keeping his voice low. That's when he heard it, a sound like small crystals tinkling against each other, coming from behind a fallen piece of wall. James approached slowly, his training keeping him alert but calm. As he rounded the corner, his light fell on something that made him freeze. There, curled up in a corner, was a young bright-scale alien. She looked like a human child in size, but her skin was covered in iridescent scales that caught his flashlight and broke it into countless colors. Unlike the images he'd seen of adult bright scales, whose scales usually shone in uniform patterns, hers flickered randomly, creating chaotic but beautiful displays. The alien child looked up at him with large, silver eyes. She was trembling. James immediately lowered his weapon and switched off his tactical light. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The child blinked at him, then spoke in broken English. "You human?" James nodded, surprised. "Yes, I'm human. I'm a soldier. My name is James." He pointed to himself. "What's your name?" The child made a series of crystal-like sounds that James knew his human tongue could never reproduce. Then she said, "In your words, Lily." "Lily," James repeated. "Are you hurt? Why are you here alone?" Lily's scales flickered in what James recognized as distress. "They leave me. Say I've broken. Wrong colors." She touched her scales, which were indeed cycling through colors in an unusual pattern compared to the steady glows he'd seen in bright-scale broadcasts. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had left her behind. Because her scales were different, he knew the bright scales were proud of their appearance and cultural uniformity, but to abandon a child. "How long have you been alone?" he asked, already reaching for his emergency rations. "Many sleeps," Lily answered. "Hide when others come. Scared." James opened a protein bar and held it out to her. "You must be hungry. This is food. It's safe for your kind. We checked before coming here." Lily hesitantly took the bar, sniffing it before taking a small bite. Her scales brightened slightly, which James hoped meant she was feeling better. His radio crackled. "Miller, status report. You've been silent for 3 minutes." James looked at the scared child before him. Protocol demanded he report any survivors immediately. The bright scales would be notified, and they would have to come back for her. But looking at how she trembled at every sound, remembering what she'd said about being left behind. "Nothing here, Base," he replied after a moment. "Just some falling debris. Heading back now." He turned to Lily. "Listen carefully. I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" Lily's scales pulsed once, twice, then settled into a gentle glow. She nodded. "Okay," James said, already thinking about how he could smuggle her into the base. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As he helped her up, James knew he was breaking about a dozen regulations, but watching her scales shimmer with hope, he couldn't bring himself to care. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. James's mind raced as he led Lily through the abandoned streets. The growing darkness helped hide them, but it also made their journey more dangerous. Every few steps, he checked his radiation monitor. The levels were still safe, but rising. "We need to be very quiet," he whispered to Lily. "Can you keep your scales dim?" Lily nodded, concentrating hard. Her naturally chaotic light patterns faded to a soft glow, barely visible in the twilight. James smiled at her effort. He had to admit, her unique scale patterns were beautiful, like an aurora dancing across the night sky. How could her people see this as a defect? As they approached the human military base, James stopped behind a fallen pillar. The base's floodlights lit up the area like artificial day. Guards patrolled the perimeter and security cameras swept back and forth. Getting Lily inside wouldn't be easy. "Okay," James whispered. "I need you to stay here for a few minutes. I'll come back with some things to help you. Do you understand?" "Yes," Lily whispered back. "I wait. I'm good at hiding." The sadness in her voice made James's heart ache. How long had she needed to be good at hiding to survive? James walked casually through the base's main gate, nodding to the guard. Inside, he headed straight for the supply depot. He needed to think this through carefully. Breaking protocol could end his military career, but leaving Lily wasn't an option. "Hey, Miller!" A voice called out. James turned to see Tom, the base's medical officer, walking toward him. "You're back late. Everything okay out there?" James hesitated. He needed help, and Tom was known for being compassionate. More importantly, he had access to the medical bay, a perfect hiding place. "Tom," James said quietly, "I need your help, but what I'm about to tell you, it has to stay between us." Tom's friendly smile faded into concern. "What's going on?" James quickly explained about finding Lily. As he spoke, Tom's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. "Jesus," Tom whispered when James finished. "They left her behind because her scales were different." That's messed up." "Will you help?" James asked. Tom ran a hand through his hair. "You know this breaks about every protocol we have, right? If we're caught." "I know, but she's just a kid, Tom." Tom was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "The medical bay has a private room for quarantine cases. No cameras. I can get her in through the emergency exit." James gathered some supplies: blankets, food, water, and clean clothes that might fit Lily. He also grabbed some basic medical supplies, remembering how thin she had looked. 20 minutes later, they had successfully smuggled Lily into the medical bay's quarantine room. Tom examined her while James stood watch. "She's dehydrated and undernourished," Tom reported, "but otherwise healthy. Her species is remarkably resilient." He smiled at Lily. "You're very strong, you know that." Lily's scales flickered with what James was beginning to recognize as happiness. "We have another problem," Tom said, turning to James. "Captain Reed is doing inspections tomorrow. All sections, including medical." James felt his stomach sink. "How long?" "We have 12 hours, maybe less." Lily must have sensed their worry because her scales began to pulse rapidly. I go?" she asked, her voice small. "No want trouble for you." "No," James said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. We'll figure this out." Just then, the base's warning system blared to life. Red lights flashed in the corridors. "Attention all personnel." Captain Reed's voice came over the speakers. "The stellar anomaly's approach has accelerated. All non-essential operations are suspended. Prepare for possible emergency evacuation. This is not a drill." James and Tom looked at each other. The situation had just become much more complicated. "What do we do now?" Tom asked. James looked at Lily, who was watching them with worried silver eyes. "We protect her," he said, "whatever it takes." Outside, the sky had turned an ominous shade of green, and the radiation monitors began to beep more frequently. Time was running out, and James knew that soon he would have to make a choice, his career or Lily's life. But looking at the young alien child, who had been abandoned by her own people, he realized it wasn't really a choice at all. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of equipment and the distant sound of the base preparing for evacuation. James sat beside Lily's bed, watching as she ate her third protein bar. Tom had gone to attend the emergency staff meeting, leaving them alone. "Your scales," James said softly, "they're beautiful when they change like that. Why would anyone think they're wrong?" Lily stopped eating, her scales dimming slightly. "My people, they want same. All same." She made a flowing motion with her hand. "Scales should move together, like water. Mine." She looked down at her arms, where the colors rippled chaotically. "Mine like storm. They say broken." "I think storms are beautiful," James said. "Different doesn't mean broken." Lily's scales brightened a little. "You different too?" she asked. James smiled sadly. "In my own way. I grew up without parents. Other kids had families, homes filled with love. I had buildings filled with other lonely children. We called it the orphanage." "Orphanage?" Lily tried the word carefully. "A place for children with no families," James explained. "I was left there when I was very young. Some people thought that made me broken too." Lily reached out hesitantly and touched his hand. Her scales pulsed with gentle colors that reminded James of a sunset. "You're not broken," she said firmly. "Neither are you," James replied, feeling a lump in his throat. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Lily spoke again. "Can you tell? About Earth? About humans?" James thought for a moment. "Well, humans are very different from each other. We come in many colors, shapes, and sizes. We speak different languages, believe different things. Sometimes that causes problems, but it also makes us stronger." As he spoke, he pulled out his tablet and showed her pictures of Earth, its oceans, mountains, cities, and people. Lily's eyes grew wide at each image, her scales flickering with excitement. "So many colors," she exclaimed when he showed her a picture of a crowded street in Mumbai. "All different, but together." "Yes," James nodded. "It took us a long time to learn, but we finally understood that our differences make us special. Strong." Lily's scales suddenly pulsed with a new pattern, rapid, almost urgent. "James, when they left, they say I danger, say my scales show something wrong inside." But she struggled with the words. "But when big light and sky started, others got sick. I didn't." James sat up straighter. "The stellar anomaly? You're resistant to it." Lily nodded. "Light hurts others, makes scales dim. Not mine." She demonstrated by making her scales brighten intensely. "I feel fine." James's mind raced. If Lily was naturally resistant to the radiation from the stellar anomaly, her defect might actually be an adaptation, an evolutionary advantage. He needed to tell Tom about this. Just then, the door slid open. Tom rushed in, his face pale. "James, we have a problem. Captain Reed is moving up the inspection. He's heading this way now." James jumped to his feet. "How long?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Lily's scales went almost completely dark with fear. "I hide?" she asked, already moving to get up. "No," James said firmly. "No more hiding." He looked at Tom. "Get me everything you have on radiation resistance and bright scale physiology. Lily just told me something important." Tom nodded and hurried to his computer terminal. James turned back to Lily, kneeling beside her bed. "Lily, I need you to be brave. Very brave. Can you do that?" Her scales flickered uncertainly, then steadied into a gentle glow. She nodded. "Good," James smiled, "because it's time to show everyone just how special you are." Outside the medical bay, they could hear footsteps approaching. James stood up, straightened his uniform, and took a deep breath. He had spent his life following orders, playing by the rules. But sometimes the right thing to do meant standing your ground. The door began to open. James stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. Behind him, Lily's scales pulsed with a strength and beauty that no one could call broken. Captain Reed stood in the doorway of the medical bay, his face unreadable as he stared at Lily. The room was so quiet that James could hear the hum of the radiation shields outside. Lily's scales pulsed with nervous energy, creating dancing patterns on the white walls. Staff Sergeant Miller, Reed's voice was dangerously calm. Explain this. Now. Before James could speak, the base's warning system screamed to life again. Red emergency lights began flashing, and the computer's automated voice filled the corridor. Warning. Radiation levels increasing. Shield capacity at 60% and falling. Reed's hand went to his earpiece as multiple voices called for his attention. Hold position, he barked into his radio. Then he turned back to James. 2 minutes, Miller. Make them count. James stepped forward. Sir, this is Lily. I found her in the abandoned colony. She was left behind because her people thought her scales were defective. But, sir, she's not defective. She's evolved. Tom jumped in, holding up his tablet. Captain, look at these readings. Normal bright scales show severe cellular damage after just minutes of exposure to the anomaly's radiation. But Lily's cells are completely stable. Her defective scales actually protect her. Another alarm blared. Warning. Shield capacity at 50%. Reed looked at the readings, then at Lily. Is this true? He asked her directly. You're immune to the radiation. Lily stood up straighter, her scales brightening. Yes, light in sky. Doesn't hurt me. Others got sick. I stay strong. The building shook as another radiation wave hit. Equipment rattled on shelves, and the lights flickered. Shield capacity at 40%, the computer announced. Evacuation protocols initiated. Reed's radio crackled with panic. Captain, the anomaly's acceleration is off the charts. The shields won't hold for more than an hour. Reed was quiet for a moment, studying Lily. Miller, you broke at least 15 regulations by bringing her here. Yes, sir. You risked your career, possibly your freedom. Yes, sir. Why? James looked at Lily, who was watching them with those large silver eyes. Because it was right, sir. Because no child should be abandoned just for being different. Another violent tremor shook the building. The lights went out completely for a few seconds before the emergency power kicked in. Shield capacity at 30%, the computer warned. All personnel report to evacuation vessels. Reed made his decision. Doctor, he turned to Tom, how quickly can you document her radiation resistance? I've already started, sir. Give me 20 minutes. You have 10. Reed turned to his radio. All units, hold evacuation. I repeat, hold evacuation. We may have a way to strengthen the shields. He looked at James. Miller, stay with her. The rest of you with me. If we're going to survive this, we need to understand how her scales work fast. The next 10 minutes were a blur of activity. Tom took samples and readings while Reed coordinated with the base's scientists. Lily sat bravely through it all, her scales glowing steadily despite her fear. Captain, a voice called from the corridor. We found something. The bright scale evacuees left behind research on scale-based radiation shielding. They were trying to replicate what they thought was a defect. James looked at Lily in amazement. They knew, he said softly. They knew you weren't broken. They were trying to copy you. Lily's scales flickered with surprise. But, they said, sometimes people fear what they don't understand, James told her, even when it could save them. Shield capacity at 20%, the computer announced emotionlessly. Reed returned to the medical bay. Miller, we need her help. The scientists think they can modify our shields based on her scale patterns, but they need direct readings while she's responding to the radiation. That's too dangerous, James protested. She'd have to go outside. I'd do it, Lily said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. Her scales were pulsing with determination. I help. Show them. Different is strong. James felt pride swell in his chest. Then I'm going with her. Reed nodded. Gear up. We've got less than 30 minutes before the shields fail completely. Let's move. As they rushed to prepare, James caught Lily's eye. Are you scared? Lily's scales rippled with color. Yes, but you say being different is special. That's right. Then we show them. Together. Outside, the sky had turned blood red, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with deadly energy. But as James helped Lily suit up for their mission, he knew they had a chance. Sometimes the very thing people called a weakness turned out to be their greatest strength. The world outside the base's walls had become an alien landscape. The red sky pulsed with waves of deadly radiation, and the crystalline buildings of the abandoned colony reflected the light like broken mirrors. James and Lily stood at the base's entrance, both wearing protective suits modified to allow her scales to be exposed to the radiation. Shield capacity at 15%. The computer's voice echoed through the base. 14 minutes until critical failure. Tom adjusted the sensors on Lily's suit one last time. These will measure how your scales react to the radiation. Try to stay within the marked zone. He pointed to an area they had cleared just outside the base's shields. James checked his own suit's seals. I'll be right beside you the whole time. Miller, Captain Reed called from the doorway. Final radiation check. If the levels get too high, you pull her back immediately. That's an order. Yes, sir. Lily's scales pulsed with a mix of fear and determination. James, she said quietly, if shields break, everyone will. We won't let that happen, James assured her. Ready? Lily nodded. Together, they stepped through the shield barrier. The air immediately felt different, heavier, charged with energy. James's suit sensors screamed warnings at him, but Lily walked forward steadily, her scales beginning to dance with incredible patterns of light. Amazing, Tom's voice came through their comms. Her scales aren't just resisting the radiation, they're absorbing it, converting it into harmless light energy. Scientists crowded around the monitors inside, watching as Lily's scales created complex, flowing patterns they had never seen before. The very radiation that threatened to kill them was becoming a beautiful light show on her skin. Keep going, Reed ordered. We're gathering the data. 10 more minutes. Suddenly, a massive radiation wave hit. James's suit crackled with warning signals, and he stumbled. But Lily stood firm, her scales now blazing like 1,000 stars. Shield capacity at 10%, the computer warned. 9 minutes until critical failure. The readings are off the charts, Tom exclaimed. We're seeing completely new energy conversion patterns. But he paused. James, her core temperature is rising. We need to bring her in. No. Lily's voice was stronger than James had ever heard it. Not done. Need more time. James watched in awe as Lily spread her arms, her scales creating patterns that seemed to ripple through the air itself. The deadly radiation swirled around her like water around a rock in a stream. 7 minutes until critical failure. We've got it, one of the scientists shouted. The conversion pattern. We can adapt it to the shields. Another radiation wave hit, bigger than the last. James's suit integrity dropped to dangerous levels. Lily, we need to go back. But Lily didn't move. Her scales were glowing brighter than ever, creating a protective bubble that extended beyond her body. James realized with amazement that his suit's radiation warnings were decreasing. She was shielding him. 5 minutes until critical failure. Modifications complete, Reed announced. Initiating shield adaptation now. The base's shields flickered, then changed color. Instead of their usual blue glow, they began to pulse with patterns similar to Lily's scales. The radiation warnings throughout the base began to quiet. Shield capacity stabilizing, the computer announced. New patterns detected. Radiation levels decreasing. Lily, James touched her shoulder gently. You did it. We can go back now. Lily turned to him, her scales still blazing with light. Then suddenly they dimmed. She swayed on her feet. Tom. James caught her as she collapsed. She's burning up. Get her inside. Now. James carried Lily through the newly strengthened shields. Medical teams rushed forward as he laid her on a stretcher. Her scales were barely glowing now. Her systems overwhelmed. Tom reported as they rushed to the medical bay. The radiation conversion took too much energy. James held Lily's hand as Tom and his team worked. Her scales flickered weakly, like a candle in the wind. "Stay with me," James whispered. "You showed them all how special you are, how strong. Now you need to stay strong a little longer." Lily's silver eyes opened slightly, and her scales gave one bright pulse. Through their fingers, James felt a slight squeeze. Outside, the base's new shields pulsed with Lily's patterns, protecting everyone inside. The very adaptation that had made her an outcast among her people had become the key to survival. Now they just had to make sure she survived to see it. 3 days had passed since Lily saved the base. She lay in the medical bay, her scales slowly regaining their strength, pulsing with gentle colors. James hadn't left her side except when ordered to rest. Tom had set up a cot for him next to her bed. "Her readings are getting stronger," Tom said, checking the monitors. "Whatever her scales did out there, her body is recovering from it remarkably well." James nodded, watching as new patterns of light danced across Lily's skin. Even in sleep, her scales never stopped moving, never fell into the uniform patterns her people had demanded. The door slid open, and Captain Reed entered. His face was grim. "Miller, we have a situation. The Brightscale government just contacted us. They're sending a ship." James stood up immediately. "They abandoned her. They have no right." "They're claiming they did not abandon her," Reed interrupted. "According to them, she was supposed to be on the primary evacuation ship. They say there was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" James's voice rose. "She was alone for weeks. They left her to die." "They lie," a soft voice said. They all turned to see Lily awake, her scales flickering with anger. "They say I danger. Say others need protection from me. From my broken scales." She tried to sit up, and James helped her. "They put me in empty building. Say wait for special ship." No ship came. Reed's face darkened. "You're certain about this?" Lily nodded. "Have proof." She pointed to her tablet, which James had given her. "I record. When they leave me. Was scared. Wanted to remember their words. To understand why." James picked up the tablet and found the recording. The voices of Brightscale officials filled the room, speaking about quarantine protocols and genetic aberrations. They talked about Lily as if she were a problem to be solved, not a child to be protected. "Send this to our legal team," Reed ordered, "and get me the highest-ranking Brightscale official on comms. Now." Within an hour, the base's command center was hosting a tense video conference. The Brightscale ambassador's face filled the main screen, his scales glowing with perfectly controlled patterns that now seemed cold and artificial to James. "The child is clearly unstable," the ambassador was saying. "Her genetic anomaly." "Her genetic advancement," Tom interrupted, stepping forward with his data tablet. "Our analysis shows her scale patterns aren't a defect at all. They're an evolutionary response to the increasing radiation in this sector of space. She's not broken. She's adapted. And you knew it." The ambassador's scales flickered briefly before returning to their rigid patterns. "Our society values order, uniformity. Such mutations saved our entire base," Reed cut in, "and based on the data we gathered, could save countless lives across this sector as radiation levels continue to rise. Which is precisely why she must be returned to us," the ambassador said smoothly, "for proper study and—" "I'm not a test." Lily's voice rang out. She stood in the doorway, supported by James. Her scales were glowing with a fierce, beautiful light. "I'm not broken. I'm not yours anymore." The ambassador's scales pulsed with shock at her defiance. "You dare." "We have evidence," Reed said coldly, "that your government deliberately abandoned a child in a radiation zone. That's a violation of at least 7 interstellar laws. Would you like me to list them?" The ambassador fell silent. "Here's what's going to happen," Reed continued. "Lily will remain under Earth's protection. Our scientists will work with any of your people who wish to study the radiation resistance properties of her scales. But she will not be treated as a test subject. She will be treated as a person." And James added, stepping forward, "She'll have a family who sees her differences as beautiful." The ambassador's scales dulled in defeat. "The Brightscale Council will need to discuss this." "Discuss quickly," Reed advised, because in 1 hour this evidence goes to the Interstellar Council. After the ambassador's image faded, Lily turned to James. Did you mean it? About family? James knelt down to her level. Every word. If you want, I'd be honored to be your family. Lily's scales erupted in a dazzling display of joy, more beautiful than any uniform pattern could ever be. She hugged James tightly. Different is strong, she whispered. That's right. James smiled, holding her close. Different is strong. Outside the base, the radiation shields continued to pulse with Lily's patterns, turning deadly energy into beautiful light, just like the child who had taught them all that sometimes the things that make us different are the things that make us shine the brightest. 6 months had passed since the radiation crisis. The human base on Colony World B-147 had become a thriving research center, its shields still pulsing with the beautiful patterns inspired by Lily's scales. Inside the base's new cultural center, Lily stood before a group of visiting scientists, her scales dancing with confidence as she explained how she had learned to control her unique abilities. The radiation doesn't hurt, she said, her English now much improved thanks to James's daily lessons. It becomes part of the light show, like turning storm clouds into rainbows. James watched proudly from the back of the room. The scared child he had found hiding in ruins had grown into a confident young teacher. She wore her differences proudly now, her scales free to flicker and dance in their own unique patterns. And your patterns? One of the bright scale scientists asked, his own scales glowing with rigid uniformity. You can't control them to match ours. Lily smiled. I could try, but why should I? My patterns are me, like Earth's oceans or its changing skies. She looked at James. Someone taught me that different is beautiful. After the presentation, James and Lily walked through the base's garden dome. They had built it using the radiation-resistant technology developed from studying her scales. Inside, plants from both Earth and the bright scale worlds grew together, creating new and beautiful combinations. The adoption ceremony is tomorrow, James said softly. Are you nervous? Lily's scales rippled with excitement. A little, but good nervous. She stopped to touch a flower that had adapted to the radiation, its petals blowing softly like her scales. Will many people come? Half the base wants to attend. James laughed. Captain Reed is handling security himself. Even some bright scale families who support the changes you've inspired want to be there. It was true. Since Lily's story had spread, other bright scales who were different had started coming forward. Some had scale patterns that moved to their own rhythms. Others had unique abilities their society had taught them to hide. Slowly, their culture was learning to value diversity instead of fearing it. Tom says more bright-scale children are being born with scales like mine, Lily said thoughtfully. He says evolution is choosing my path. Nature often knows better than we do, James replied. Speaking of Tom, he wants to do one last checkup before tomorrow, and then we need to finish decorating your new room. They headed to the medical bay, passing other base personnel who smiled and waved at Lily. She was no longer the base's secret, but its heart. Her story had changed not just the bright-scale approach to radiation protection, but also their understanding of acceptance and growth. Tom was waiting with his medical scanner, but today he also had a surprise. Look what just arrived from Earth, he said, holding up a small package. Lily opened it carefully. Inside was a crystal that caught the light and broke it into countless colors, just like her scales. It's called a prism, Tom explained. It shows how light can become many colors. Reminded me of someone special. Lily's scales glowed with joy as she held the crystal up to the light. It's beautiful, like me. Exactly like you, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Beautiful because it's different. That evening, as they finished setting up Lily's new room in James's quarters, Lily placed the prism on her windowsill. The setting sun caught it, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the walls, mixing with the light from her scales. Tomorrow, she said quietly, I get a real family. James knelt beside her. You already have a family. Tomorrow just makes it official on paper, but you've been my daughter since the day I found you. Lily's scales pulsed with the pattern James now recognized as pure happiness. "And you've been my father since you showed me I wasn't broken." They stood together, watching the sun set through the radiation shields that pulsed with Lily's patterns. Outside, the deadly radiation that had once threatened them was transformed into beautiful light, just as fear had been transformed into understanding, and loneliness into family. Different wasn't just strong, they had learned. Different was the future, and the future was beautiful.